And so then when you read a story that works, you're just entranced by it, and you all know that. You go to a movie and it's a great movie and it's like you're just blown away, you know. A movie can pull you in and turn you into one of the screen characters and like run you through a huge set of emotions. I saw this movie once about South America. It started with this guy running out of a subway naked, and he didn't know where he was, and it turned out that he had been absconded by the totalitarian death squads, and he couldn't remember anything about himself. And he went back to his village, and basically what happened was that he ended up back in the totalitarian death grip, and it showed how the fascist state had saturated the village completely, and so it was a tragedy. And you could see with every action that this amnestic guy, as he recreated himself and remembered his identity, was going to travel down exactly the same road because nothing had changed. And by the time, I wish, I've looked for what that movie was for years, I've never been able to find it again, but when the movie was over, every single person in the theater was crying, and not just a little bit, it was like they were just out of it. It was brilliant, terrifying movie, and that meant there was something right about it, man, and it got people. And you might say, you know, you have dim apprehensions about the world, and some of those are instinctual and some of those are a consequence of your experience, and it's like the pieces are fragmented, but if you get away from them a long ways you could see how they fit together, but they're fragmented. And then you go see a story and those pieces go click, 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 and you think, wow, that's how that works out, that's what that means. And that produces that overwhelming emotion, and that's partly how you make yourself transparent to yourself, you know. You go experience a story, you go watch a story, you tell a story, and you start to find out who you are by doing that. My nephew had a dream at one point. Someone made a little animated thing out of it and put it on the internet, which is quite cool. So anyways, he was having night terrors, and he ran around like a little knight, you know, a Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T, knight, and he had a little, you know, armor and a sword, and he'd run around the house with a little knight hat on, being a knight. And he was only like 4 or something, and he'd watched a lot of Disney movies, a lot of movies, so he kind of got the knight idea. He's acting that out, and he was having these terrors at night, right? And so he'd go to bed with his little knight hat and his sword, and he'd put him on his bed, and then at night he'd wake up screaming, and that happened for a very long time. And so when I went to visit, you know, I found out that this was happening, and he had a night terror. So the kid wakes up with night terrors, screaming, but can't remember anything, generally speaking. So anyways, this was happening, and so it happened one day, and I was sitting with him and his family at the breakfast table, and I said, did you have a dream? And he said, oh yes, I had a dream. I said, well, you know, what was your dream? And he said, well, I was out on this field, and I was surrounded by these dwarfs, and they came up to my knees, and they didn't have any arms, they had big feet, and they were covered with hair, and there was a cross shaved at the top of their head, and they were all greasy, and they had huge beaks, and everywhere I went they jumped at me with their beaks, and there was lots of them, and everybody was very quiet after he said this, because it was like, oh, that's why you're screaming at night. It's like, yeah, okay. And and then he said, but at the background there was a dragon, and the dragon would blow out smoke and fire, and then it would turn into these dwarfs. So it's like, man, that kid had a problem, right? It was like, well, what are you going to do? You fight off a dwarf, who cares? It's like, puff, 10 more. That's life, man. That's life. Really, that's the Hydra. You cut off one head, 7 more grow. That's life. Snakes everywhere. And you get rid of one, there'll be more. And so he figured that out. It's a hell of an existential shock when you're 4. And so he's like, he's a knight. He's thinking, what do I do about these dwarfs? Well, there's too many of them, but there's a dragon. Well, so I said, well, what could you do about that? Right? Loaded question. It implies that you could do something about that. Well, he kind of knew that, which is why he was running around like a knight. He kind of figured that out. And he said, well, I get my dad, and I jump up on the dragon, and I poke out both of its eyes with my sword, and then I go right down its stomach to the place where the fire came out, the firebox, and then I'd carve a piece of the firebox out, and I'd make a shield. And that would be the end of that. And I thought, wow, good work, kid, like you really got it, right? It's the central human story. There's the terrible unknown, right? Fire breathing, generating trouble, and what do? You confront that, and by confronting it you get stronger. That's the shield, and that's what a human being is, and that's right. It's exactly right. And that was the end of his night terrors, by the way, which seems too good to be true, but it is actually true, because I followed up with his mother for a long time, and that was that. He catalyzed that part of his identity. He adopted the role of the mythological hero, and that's what he needed to do, because like there was lots of there's a dragon and a bunch of dwarfs. Like, what the hell are you going to do about that? Run? That's not going to help. You know, if you run in a dream like that, the dwarves multiply and they get bigger, and you get smaller as you run. It's like, that is not a good solution, and people do that in their life all the time. And so the dwarves get bigger until they're giants, and they get smaller until there's nothing left of them, and then there's no recovery. That is not good. Now, okay, so now I also propose to you that there's a symbolic structure to the world. It's a meta structure, I would say. I think these categories are truly real, and they're basically this. There's unexplored territory, there's explored territory, and there's you. And unexplored territory is the source of great riches, and it probably will kill you, and explored territory is your culture, and it crunches you into submission and conformity and turns you into a civilized being, and you're stuck with both of those. And then there's you, and you know, you're kind of admirable and cool, and you do a lot of decent, wonderful, amazing things, and there's things about you that are just horrible, and you know about them, and you're stuck with them, and that's the world, and that's the landscape of the world. And what you'll see, if you pay attention, is that people who are ideologues, like Rousseau, or say like Hobbes, but it doesn't matter, ideologues will tell you part of that story. So environmentalists, for example, will say nature, that's pristine beauty, natural harmony, French landscape, it's a paradise, especially if there are no people, it's a paradise. And then culture is a rapacious monster, and human beings driving that culture against nature are monsters of a sort, and perhaps there should be fewer of them. It's like, yeah, that's all true, exactly, dead on, right on, exactly right. Is that movie called Avatar? Yes, that's James Cameron's movie, right? That's that story, yeah. And hey, it's a good story. It's even a mythological story, but it's only half the story. The other story, you could think about it as a frontier myth. That's Star Trek, or Star Wars for that matter, mostly Star Trek. It's like, but we'll put it in context of the frontier myth, the myth that drew settlers into America, say. It's, well, there's a wild, savage landscape out there that can be conquered by, and settled and stabilized by civilization, and it'll be the heroic pioneer who does it. It's exactly the opposite story of the environmental story, which is actually why I think the environmental story eventually emerged. It was, you know, the frontier story had a lack in it, missed half of the world, and so the other story had to come up, and it did. And if you take both of those stories, even though they're exactly opposite to one another, if you know both of those stories, then you know the whole story. And it's really weird, you know, because one of the propositions of formal logic is, it's a fundamental proposition, is that something can't be itself and its opposite at the same time. It's like, that's true for some sorts of things. It's true for logical claims. But it's completely wrong in this particular situation, because things are what they are and they're opposite at the same time. And that makes it very, very difficult to, that's why a dragon hoards gold. It's like, what's up with that? Well, it'll eat you, and it will, but it has gold. Well, so what do you do about that? Because it's paradoxical demands. Well, what you want to do is face the dragon and get the damn gold. That's what you want to do. Well, you have to be a paradoxical being even to do that. So, you know, in The Hobbit, for example, when, what's his name? Frodo, right? It's Bilbo in The Hobbit. You know, he's kind of this little underdeveloped overprotected shire dweller, and he's called on a great adventure to go and find the dragon, and he has to become a thief in order to manage it. Well, that's pretty weird, you know. It's like, well, it's because as a good citizen he's just not enough to conquer a dragon. He has to also become a bad citizen in some sense. He has to incorporate the part of himself that's monstrous, let's say, and develop that and hone it. And that's to say that, well, if you're harmless, you're not virtuous. You're just harmless. You're like a rabbit. A rabbit isn't virtuous. It just can't do anything except get eaten. It's not virtuous. If you're a monster and you don't act monstrously, then you're virtuous. But you also have to be a monster. Well, you see this all the time. Harry Potter's like that too. It's like he's flawed, he's hurt, he's got evil in him. He can talk to snakes, man. He breaks rules all the time. All the time. He's not obedient at all. But you know, he has a good reason for breaking the rules. And if he couldn't break the rules, him and his little clique of rule-breaking, you know, troublemakers, if they didn't break the rules, they wouldn't attain the highest goal. So it's very peculiar, but it's a very, very common mythological notion. You know, the hero has to be a monster, but a controlled monster. Batman is like that, you know. I mean, it's everywhere. It's the story you always hear.
Is this where morals become ethics?
Meaning, you have to be more precise.
I feel like, because everyone's moral, but in order to become ethics, you have to refine the morals. And so you have to kind of go into...
Well, that's a good question, you know, because one question is, you know, you're kind of implicitly moral insofar as you're socialized. But that's sort of procedural, it's just built into you. This is different. This is also becoming conscious of it and expanding out your personality into dimensions that it wouldn't normally occupy. So this happens to people all the time. So, for example, lots of my clients, my clinical clients, are too agreeable. And they're generally women, because women are more agreeable than men, but not always, because I've had agreeable men as clients as well. And what happens is they're resentful and they don't know how to stand up for themselves, and it's because they're very compassionate by nature. And so if you're entering into a negotiation with them, they'll let you win. Well, that's not so good, because you know you need to win too, especially if you're in an organization of adults where there's a struggle, right? When you have kids, you can let them win, especially infants. You have to let them win, and that's partly why compassion is so necessary. But as a basis for negotiation between adults, it's like, sorry, it's insufficient. You have to be a bit of a monster so that you can say no. And so a lot of what you do in psychotherapy is treat people's anxiety and depression. That's a huge chunk of it. Help them straighten out the way they think. That's a huge chunk of it. But another chunk of it is, well, let's toughen you up. You know, let's put you in a position where you can bargain. Let's teach you how to assert yourself and stand up for yourself. And that's assertiveness training, and it's a huge chunk of psychotherapy. And you need to learn it. It's like, because part of how you regulate your interactions with other people is to negotiate. And you cannot negotiate unless you can say no. You can't do it. And it causes conflict to say no, and if you don't like conflict, which is basically the definition of being agreeable, then you can't tolerate the conflict, and so then you can't negotiate on your own behalf, and so then you keep losing, and you're bullied, and you know, it's not good. Then you get resentful, and it's really not good. So you have to develop your inner monster a little bit, and then that makes you a better person, not a worse person. It's weird, but that's just how it is. Outside of that diagram is chaos itself, and that's the chaos from which things emerge. Now, I can't tell you much about that yet because it's too damn complicated, but I think the best way to think about chaos is as potential. That's one way of thinking about it. It's also that place you end up when you don't know what to do. It's the source of all things, but it's also the terrible predator, the terrible eternal predator that lurks beyond the explored domain. It's a winged dragon, and it's winged, who knows why? Matter and spirit, that's partly what it is, and I'll explain that later. It's also potentially the predatory beast that's been after us for forever.